To other news now, more reaction coming in how South Africa should deal with the unsubstantiated claims made by the US President Donald Trump in the last 36 hours. He's accused our government of confiscating land, saying that a particular group of people are being treated very badly. Newzroom Afrika's Mnisi been watching the reaction here. Joins us now in our studio. Linda, good morning to you. Obviously, a lot going on with all of this. Firstly, how is the conversation moving in terms of how we should be tackling this challenge?
I think, Stephen, looking at what has been happening over the past week or so, and government's reactions to what has been happening on the world stage. First, it was with, the carting of aid, as well as what happened with Rwanda last week. And now there's been a conversation about how effective government communication should be, particularly at this particular time. And we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa responding shortly after that tweet by the US President Donald Trump, talking about how this was a democratic process. The land reforms that we're seeing in South Africa is a democratic process. And also speaking at length, if you listen to the president's spokespersons talking about how there are safeguards to everything that has happened, particularly with this act that has now been signed into law. In the US, South Africa obviously is now talking about how it's going to engage the US government, how it's going to engage Donald Trump. There is an investigation that he speaks about, but also the South African government is talking about how a meeting needs to be held, to discuss these issues, to educate them about what is happening in South Africa. Let's take a listen to what the SA ambassador to the US had to say about those engagements.
So the relief is that there is an investigation. The second thing is that there's a focus. It could have been any other matter under the sun that he could have picked the fight on. He chose the land reform issue. We know where it's coming from. But I think that having seen the thinness of the allegations against us, I think South Africa should be feeling that we must now get into the game. We must get to those who are agitating the president. We must get to this investigation because we think we have a rational, reasonable case to put on the table. I think we have already begun to call for a teleconference between Secretary Marco Rubio and Minister Lamola so that we can start the process of engaging now that we know what the terms of engagement are, what the focus is.
All right, Stephen, so there's also been conversations about what needs to happen to the parties that are driving this misinformation, particularly to the US government. And this is what, Ibrahim Rasool had to say about it.
I think that what our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has said, that we are a country with a rule of law, and so we won't be clamping down on an AfriForum. I think they are endangering our economy. They are endangering vulnerable people who rely on aid like the PEPFAR funds, the USAID money, etc., etc. So I think they should examine their consciences. It is our job as the mission in South Africa and as the government of South Africa, and particularly the government of national unity. And so I was very heartened that it was not a section of the government of national unity that repudiated what President Trump was saying. It was the whole of the government of national unity that did so. And I think that isolates those elements who think that they can speak on behalf of South Africa, on behalf of a particular section of South Africa.
It's an interesting comment there by our ambassador to the United States, Linda, that all of the parties across the national coalition actually sort of stood as one. We forget that's the Freedom Front Plus on one side and the Pan-Africanist Congress on the other, right?
Absolutely.
It's a very interesting thing that's happening here. And this is fundamentally important to what's played out over the last 24 hours in our politics.
Absolutely, Stephen. And I think what's more important is the historical context and the historical background of the land reform and the conversation about land reform in South Africa. I mean, since post-apartheid, there's been a conversation about how government should tackle this. And for the very first time, there is an act that's signed into law to deal with these issues. Now, the conversation then, goes to a point where there are questions being asked about whether from Trump's point of view, this is about facts or it's about really, carrying that misinformation. Let's take a listen to what Songezo Zibi had to say.
What South Africans and the South African government need to understand is that Donald Trump is the first president in the world who is exactly like the person we experience on Twitter. Doesn't care about facts, doesn't care about information. The cruelty and the rudeness is the point and end goal of what he's doing. We really have to internalize it. There is not very much that we can do in order to convince Donald Trump to change, to become a person who appreciates facts, who appreciates nuance, especially historical nuance in our case. And that means we must temper our diplomatic expectations with the reality that we will still get certain consequences anyway, because he does not care.
Linda, I mean, this story is going to run and run. The presidency of the United States is the biggest sort of bully pulpit where you can stand and shout and dominate world discussions for a long time, and I expect we'll see more of this. The president, our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, a big speech of him on Thursday night. I mean, he on one side has to represent South Africa, stand sort of firm against what I think I would call the bullying of Trump. On the other hand, would quite like the foreign aid money back. So, I mean, that's difficult for him.
Absolutely. I mean, you would have seen the statement that he released yesterday, particularly looking at PEPFAR and the contribution that the US makes to South Africa. So it seems at this point it's about balancing everything, you know. If you listen to the president's spokesperson last night, yesterday, in fact, telling us that, you know, that contribution is about 17%, but there are other programs that are much smaller that the South African government, you know, can do something about. But now, of course, there are also other trade relations that South Africa still needs to maintain. So it's really about how he handles the situation that will take the country forward.